Have you ever felt like you're at a disadvantage because of the error code group that you're in?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are benefits to both, and so sometimes I think, like, yeah, even though I said we have to put in effort sometimes, even though we are, like, our answers are coded, you don't always still specifically know what's wrong with your, like, mistake. You're only given the general, subject of what mistake that is, and so but the fact that they still have to put in even more effort to find exactly what kind of mistake it is, I think that does make it more memorable and like you're less likely to make that mistake later sometimes. I mean, I can see that side of the argument.
Even like the uncoded, I don't feel like I'd call it a disadvantage, but there's like a lot of times where I see something and I don't know what it is and I tell myself that it's right, but I know it's wrong because it's highlighted. And then I look at the codes and I don't know what's wrong with it, so and like I know you can't help us, so it makes it harder, but it also makes you a better writer, so then you know not to make that mistake again, even though you think it's right.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a disadvantage either. It's just, I guess I can just mostly see some of the positive aspects of the other side that I don't get with my grouping.
It's definitely better than like actually you crossing it out than telling us what's wrong, because then we won't learn anything, so we're actually learning when we're correcting our essays.
At a glance, I think it might seem that being in the uncoded group is a disadvantage, and I know that there are other people in the uncoded group who think that it's a disadvantage, but like I said and like a lot of you said, it really does help in the long run, I think. And I think although you have to it might seem like a disadvantage to put in that extra work, it will be worth it in the end, because then you won't have to put in as much work later when you're improved in your writing side.
Yeah, going off of that, I feel like the people in the uncoded group, even at this point, have a sense of like how the flow of the language works, whereas like I personally, like, I still need assistance, whether or not if it's like a verb correction that I need to make or whatever it is.
I feel like in terms of making the specific corrections for that specific paper, the students who are coded probably have an advantage because they know exactly what kind of mistake they made. But I feel like long term, the uncoded students have an advantage because we have to go back and look for our mistakes ourselves, and then that's going to be more memorable because it took a little more effort.
I just know for me personally though, like I just still like being in the uncoded group, because even if I was, or in the coded group I mean, because even if I was in the uncoded group, like I said earlier, I'm just not at that level yet. That's just my personal writing, where I'm not at the level where I don't think I could figure out the my error if I was just shown the error. I think I need the extra help at this point, where I need to be told like exactly what error I made.
And the other side to that is, I've had this happen with some of my writing, where if you look at the error just without looking at the code first or the color, if you look at the error, you can kind of think what you think is wrong with it. But then if you look at the coding sheet and it's an error that's completely different than what you thought, you kind of start second guessing yourself. So again, I wouldn't make that a disadvantage, and I think just both have their pros and cons to each.
I think it like depends like on the person, because I think people who maybe are more advanced or sound in their Spanish writing are gonna benefit more from the uncoded group, and then I think it's like tiers. I think you should start at the coded group so you can like learn where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then as you better yourself, I think an uncoded style of feedback is gonna help you move even further. I think it should definitely like come in steps.
So, and this question isn't even one that I prepared, but I want to ask it now. So, if we expanded this like writing process, let's say, to other levels of Spanish, so like for kids that are in Spanish like 2, 3, 4, do you think given their level the coded feedback would be more effective for those students, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I wish we would have had done more writing, not just writing, but papers like we do in Spanish 5. I don't think I've written a Spanish paper before Spanish 4 and 5. I think starting as early as 2, even though that's definitely going to be a rough paper, like having had that practice, I know I would have been a better writer at this point. And so, but starting that far back, I think the best kind of feedback would have been the coded feedback. And then I think by the level I'm at now, I'd be comfortable with having uncoded feedback, and I think it would help me move now into even further advanced writing.
Yeah, I agree with Scott. I think maybe like Spanish 2 and 3 start writing essays and do the coded, and then 4 and 5 move into more of the uncoded. And I feel like if we would have had, like in English, they don't just give you an essay and then expect you to do super well on it in the beginning. Like you kind of ease up to it and learn about the writing process and everything. And there was something else I was gonna say.
Yeah, I feel like if you're writing a paper, Spanish 2 or 3, your writing isn't that advanced, but learning from the uncoded, you're gonna learn what mistakes you're making, so that once you get up to Spanish 4, you get used to the mistakes that you're usually making, and you're gonna start understanding why you're making these mistakes, and it makes it easier.
Yeah. So I feel like coded feedback would be especially beneficial for students in 2 and 3, specifically because they're still learning the patterns of the language. At 5, we're starting to see most of the patterns and understand how Spanish really works. But in 2 and 3, that coded feedback can help students understand where the patterns that they're missing are.
And one way maybe to integrate that is in Spanish 2 and 3 stress the coded, but then if you have students who are just naturally better at writing, maybe give them the uncoded, because then everybody's at least challenged in some way. They're challenged individually to make their writing better.
Yeah, and what I was going to say before is in those early levels of Spanish, you don't know all of the tenses and you don't know all like how to conjugate all these different types of verbs. So I think you really need the coded, because sometimes if you might see something highlighted and it might not even be something you learned, or it might be something that you aren't really comfortable with at that level in Spanish.
I agree with like starting out like the coded, but I also feel like especially at Spanish like 2 and 3, like the elements of like developing an overall idea and like the components of like an essay should also be taken into consideration, because I think at this point right now we're all trying to like spill our ideas out and also have our grammar
But we've
correct.
had like no practice.
Right, yeah.
I was gonna say the same thing that Scott said just earlier. If they were started in like Spanish 2 with that kind of stuff, or if we were, then maybe at this time we would be like pretty used to the uncoded. And then like I think eventually if we were started that early, we would even be having like less mistakes overall, just like knowing about them more and really catching ourselves as we're writing.
Yeah, and being overall better writers, because we're used to since now we started writing a bunch of papers, I feel if we would have started like in Spanish 2, the mistakes we're making now would have been the mistakes we're making then, so by now we would have been improved, like those mistakes would have been improved.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to mention?
Was there ever gonna be like a group that didn't get any errors back, or was this always between? Because I don't know. I thought at the beginning of the year when you discussed this, you talked about the multiple different groups. I didn't know there.
So no, so it's between group studies. That means that you have 2 different groups that
right,
get 2
right.
different like treatments. Because I was looking at possibly doing that where one group wouldn't get any feedback, but that based on like prior research wouldn't have been
It's, like, not
an
comparable
equal.
to
Yeah,
the-
exactly. So just to kind of keep things more like level, it was
Yeah,
just
it's
between
like the
the
final
two.
2. You go from then like uncoded errors
To nothing
to
marked.
nothing marked. You just get it back.
Well, then what's
But I
even
get-
the point of
I
doing
guess.
another draft then?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you think if you were given back your essay like 2 weeks later with nothing marked, you would be able to find mistakes in
No
your
way.
own work?
Yeah.
I'd probably find a little, but
Especially with I think the keyword there is 2 weeks later. I think.
yeah, just because it's been a while since you read it, so you like.
Hmm.
You know, I don't know. I guess maybe if I read through it, I'd be like, oh, that's something. But I definitely would not find all of them, and I definitely would not find as many
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
I would with the marking.
I
I would
wouldn't
probably just
find-
think I'm still right.
I wouldn't find major mistakes. I'd be like, oh, this needs more like added information. I'd do that,
Mm.
but I wouldn't find like grammar mistakes that mostly what I have now.
I feel like I would, because even when I'm like looking at it, like whenever we get our feedback back, I usually, I just like, oh, that was a dumb mistake, because it's usually like articles that I'm mixing up because I'm like typing so fast and like rushing to like finish, or it's like the tense of the verb. And so I feel like if I actually go in there trying to look for like the little grammar mistakes, I would find a lot of them, but definitely not all of them.
But I mean, I know we like, I don't know, I still like, I like the idea of getting, like what I mentioned earlier, like the last year being like there should be a time where we get the essay back, and even if, we're not given any mistakes or anything, but we're still prompted to change things, because writing can always be improved, and even looking at it, even if things aren't technically incorrect, there's still probably a better way to phrase certain things that you wrote. So I think, even though we like laughed about it earlier, like what's even the point, I think there is a point behind just looking it over again, taking like time off of writing it, getting it back, and then being prompted to write it again, do another draft. But because once you read it again, there's still, like I said, like better ways to phrase certain things, and there's always going to be improvements you can make.
And I think that process you could integrate past Spanish 5 into maybe like AP Spanish. Because at that point it's a college course, and you could justify that, especially if we're starting in Spanish 2 with decoded responses, that by a college level Spanish course you should be able to look at it and
I think
figure out your own errors.
towards the end of the, like if we had done what we mentioned in the perfect editing world, that if like, I think by like end of the year Spanish 5 and then into AP and college level Spanish, I think it'd be a good technique to be prompted to write more drafts, and like I said earlier.
That makes a lot of sense, especially since college level Spanish, like your professor isn't going to like highlight your essay, give it back to you, tell you to make it better, and then you'll get a good grade because of that. You have to turn it in good the first time, so you have to go through that writing
I
process.
think we
by
need to know the
yourself.
writing by yourself. We need to know the writing process, and right now we're at the writing process that I think we should have been practicing for a while now.
Great. Well, thank you for your participation in the focus group. We're now adjourned. I don't know. Okay. Thank you, guys.